Well, hello everyone. It's been a bit, and I know the video quality is not as good as it used to be. I'm having issues with my iPhone camera. Going to be probably just investing in a really good webcam or my husband's mirrorless, but I have to learn how to set that back up again. So this is what we got, and we are back on the morality of capitalism. And the chapter that we are on, I started reading it a bit ago and then had to pick it back up because so many things were going crazy. So it was called Ayn Rand and Capitalism, the Moral Revolution by David Kelly. And he says in this essay, the objectivist philosopher David Kelly proposes a fourth revolution to complete the foundations of the modern world and to secure the gains made possible by capitalism. And starts with a quote, "We have it in our power to begin the world over again." Thomas Paine, Common Sense, 1792. It says, the crisis in financial markets has set off a predictable torrent of anti-capitalist sentiment. Despite the fact that government regulations were a major cause of the crisis, anti-capitalists and their enablers in the media have blamed the market and called for new restraints. And isn't that always the case? Regulation of production and trade is one of the two basic things that government does in our mixed economy. The other is redistribution, transferring income and wealth from one set of hands to another. So, Smith demonstrated that when individuals are left free to pursue their own economic interests, the result is not chaos, but spontaneous order. Think I-pencil, a market system in which the actions of individuals are coordinated and more wealth is produced than would be the case if the government managed the economy. The political revolution, the triumph of the doctrine of individual rights, was accompanied by a spirit of moral idealism. It was the liberation of man from tyranny, the recognition that every individual, whatever his station in society, is an end in himself. But the economic revolution was couched in morally ambiguous terms. As an economic system, capitalism was widely regarded as having been conceived in sin. That is such a good turn of phrase there. The desire for wealth fell under the shadow of the Christian injunction against selfishness and avarice. The early students of spontaneous order were conscious that they were asserting a moral paradox. The paradox, as Bernard Mandeville put it, that private vices could produce public benefits. The critics of the market have always capitalized on these doubts about its morality. Capitalism has never escaped the moral ambiguity in which it was conceived. It is valued for the prosperity it brings. It is valued as a necessary precondition for political and intellectual freedom. But few of its defenders are prepared to assert that the mode of life central to capitalism, the pursuit of self-interest through production and trade, is morally honorable, much less noble or ideal. In everyday speech, the altruism is often taken to mean nothing more than kindness or common courtesy. Actually, says the term altruism, but its real meaning historically and philosophically is self-sacrifice. Now that's something you need to understand. I guess this was a pre-internet form of shit posting, but I'm not comfortable with Ayn Rand's denunciation of altruism. But when you understand here what she means, is she means self-sacrifice, not compassion, not charity, not kindness. As Ayn Rand put it, the basic principle of altruism is that no man has a right to exist for his own sake, that service to others is the only justification of his existence, and that self-sacrifice is his highest moral duty, virtue, and value. When you define it that way, I also do not agree with altruism. But the fact is that is not how most people define it. So you come across looking like a real jerk when you denounce altruism. But if you don't care, you don't care. Demands for social justice take two forms, which I will call welfarism and egalitarianism. The difference in these two conceptions of social justice is the difference between absolute and relative levels of well-being. The welfarist demands that people have access to a certain minimum standard of living. And I think this is what most people hold to. As long as this floor or safety net exists, it does not matter how much wealth anyone else has or how great the disparities are between the rich and the poor. So welfarists are primarily interested in programs that benefit people who are below a certain level of poverty or who are sick, out of work, or deprived in some way. Egalitarians, on the other hand, and that's where society is shifting, have often said that of two societies, they prefer the one in which wealth is more evenly distributed, even if its overall standard of living is lower. Thus, egalitarians tend to favor government measures such as progressive taxation, which aim to redistribute wealth across the entire income scale, not merely at the bottom. They also tend to support the nationalization of goods, such as education and medicine, taking them off the market entirely and making them available to everyone more or less equally. That's, I think we would call that, instead of equality of opportunity, equality of outcome. The fundamental premise of welfarism is that people have rights to goods, such as food, shelter, and medical care. They are entitled to these things. On this assumption, someone who receives benefits from a government program is merely getting what is due him. The concept of welfare rights, or positive rights, as they are often called, is modeled on the traditional liberal rights of life, liberty, and property. But there is a well-known difference. The traditional rights are rights to act without interference from others. And, that's the classic definition of negative rights. Accordingly, welfare rights impose positive obligations on others. From an ethical standpoint, the essence of welfarism is the premise that the need of one individual is a claim on other individuals. And of course, libertarians absolutely reject that. The implicit assumption that a person's ability and initiative are social assets, which may be exercised only on condition that they are aimed at the service of others. The ethical framework of egalitarianism is defined by the concept of justice rather than rights. Now, that is a really interesting way to put it, in a way that I never thought, where the welfare scheme, posits positive rights, whereas the equity, the equal outcome scheme, posits justice. A pure market economy, of course, does not produce equality among individuals, but few egalitarians have claimed that strict equality of outcome is required by justice. The most common position is that there is a presumption in favor of equal outcomes, and that any departure from equality must be justified by its benefits to society as a whole. What is the philosophical basis of this principle? Egalitarians often argue that it follows logically from the basic principle of justice, that people are to be treated differently only if they differ in some morally relevant way. Once we abandon this picture, what becomes of the principle espoused by Towney, Rawls, and others? The principle that inequalities are acceptable only if they serve the interests of all. If this cannot be grounded in justice, and obviously we don't think it can, and I'm giving you a snapshot of this. There's whole paragraphs, that I skipped through. I'm reading conclusory statements. If this cannot be grounded in justice, then it must be regarded as a matter of the obligations we bear to each other as individuals. When we consider it in this light, we can see that it is the same principle we identified as the basis of welfare rights. The principle is that the productive may enjoy the fruits of their efforts only on condition that their efforts benefit others as well. There is no obligation to produce, to create, to earn an income. But if you do, the needs of others arise as a constraint on your actions. Your ability, your initiative, your intelligence, your dedication to your goals, and all the other qualities that make success possible are personal assets that you put under an obligation to those with less ability, initiative, intelligence, or dedication. In other words, every form of social justice rests on the assumption that individual ability is a social asset. I am going to tweet that. And here we come to the crux of the matter. In respecting the rights of other people, I recognize that they are an end in themselves, that I may not treat them merely as a means to my satisfaction in the way I treat inanimate objects. Why then is it not equally moral to regard myself as an end? Why should I not refuse, out of respect for my own dignity as a moral being, to regard myself as a means in the service of others? Good question. Altruists argue that life presents us with a basic choice. We must either sacrifice ourselves to others or sacrifice ourselves to others. No, excuse me. I read that wrong. Altruists argue that life presents us with a basic choice. We must either sacrifice others to ourselves or sacrifice ourselves to others. The latter is the altruist course of action, and the assumption is that the only alternative is life as a predator. But this is a false alternative according to Rand. Life does not require sacrifice in either direction. The interests of rational people do not conflict, and the pursuit of our genuine self-interest requires that we deal with others by means of peaceful, voluntary exchange. The egoist is usually pictured as someone who will do anything to get what he wants, someone who will lie, steal, and seek to dominate others in order to satisfy his desires. Like most people, Rand would regard this mode of life as immoral. But her reason is not that it harms others. Her reason is that it harms the self. Subjective desire is not the test for whether something is in our interest, and deceit, theft, and power are not the means for achieving happiness or a successful life. So a bit of a utilitarian, even though claimed to be objectivist, utilitarianism is creeping in there. The virtues I've mentioned are objective standards. They are rooted in man's nature and thus apply to all human beings. But their purpose is to enable each person to achieve, maintain, fulfill, and enjoy that ultimate value, that end in itself, which is his own life. Thus, the purpose of ethics is to tell us how to achieve our real interests, not how to sacrifice them. So, it concludes, I said at the outset that capitalism was the result of 3 revolutions, each of them with a radical break from the past. The political revolution established the primacy of individual rights and the principle that government is man's servant, not his master. The economic revolution brought an understanding of markets. The industrial revolution radically expanded the application of intelligence to the process of production. But mankind never broke with its ethical past. The ethical principle that individual ability is a social asset is incompatible with a free society. If freedom is to survive and flourish, we need a 4th revolution, a moral revolution that establishes the moral right of the individual to live for himself. Actually, I thought that was a really, really good chapter. We're moving on next, not right now, but this is what we'll be reading next, the section 3, which has the subtitle of The Production and Distribution of Wealth. And that chapter starts with the market economy and the distribution of wealth. Let's see how many pages that is, the way I do. Oh, it's just a couple, so we'll get through this quickly. It's only like 4 pages long in our next installment. So sorry it took a bit, and until next time, mi guapa, stay libertad.